Family vanished. After mountain storm, 23 eerie days later, a hunter uncovers a terrifying truth. They say accidents happen, that the wilderness can swallow you in a blink. But what if it wasn't the wilderness? What if it was a lie, a cover, something far more chilling than a simple tragedy? Winona Clark had always believed the mountains held stories, but she never imagined her family would become one. This wasn't just about survival. This was about finding the truth before the snow buried it forever. The sky over Glacier National Park had turned a steel gray, pressing low over the peaks like a storm that had lost its patience. Snowflakes fell in silence, thick and relentless, covering everything in a soft deceit, erasing footsteps, obscuring trails, blanketing memory. But one figure moved with purpose through the cold. A woman in a forest green parka, her silver hair tucked neatly beneath a wool hat, her boots worn from decades of service. Winona Clark, 67 years old, retired park ranger, wilderness survival instructor, and right now, just a mother looking for her son. It had been 23 days since Ethan, her only child, had vanished on a weekend hiking trip with his wife Vanessa and their 7-year-old twin daughters, Hazel and Luna. The official story was as bleak as the weather. An unexpected storm, poor visibility, no sign of foul play. The search parties had combed the southern trails for a week before authorities quietly closed the case. Presumed dead, they said. A tragic accident. Move on. But Winona couldn't. She had walked these mountains long before GPS devices and trail markers. She had led rescue teams in whiteout conditions, had read the land like scripture. And Ethan, he had grown up under her wing. He wasn't careless. He didn't take stupid risks. He knew what to do when the sky turned. That's what haunted her. That's what brought her back. Inside the rustic warmth of a mountain lodge, Winona stood at the wooden foyer, knocking snow off her boots. The scent of firewood and pine filled the air. Tourists laughed by the fireplace, oblivious. At the front desk, a clerk named Marianne looked up and froze, recognition spreading across her face. "Ms. Clark," she said gently, "we didn't expect you back this season." Winona nodded once. "I'm not here for the view." Marianne hesitated, then stepped from behind the counter. "We already replaced the flyers, but if there's anything else—" Without answering, Winona reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of updated missing person posters. The top one showed Ethan, thick sweater, gentle eyes, standing beside Vanessa, smiling tightly. The girls in the front, gap-toothed and laughing, their jackets bright yellow and lavender. "These are more recent prints," Winona said, her voice composed but firm. "Better clarity. I want them at every trailhead, every lodge." Marianne took them without hesitation. "Of course." As Winona walked the length of the lodge, pinning the posters with steady fingers, she noticed the subtle shift in energy around her. Conversations dipped, eyes followed. People who didn't know her name still knew her story, or at least they thought they did. It wasn't pity that angered her. It was the way they had all accepted the version handed to them. That a family disappeared and must have died. That closure was something you could manufacture with a press release and a moment of silence. But Winona had seen the terrain. She had walked the possible routes. Ethan wouldn't have dragged his kids into uncharted snowfields. He would have turned back. He would have radioed. There was something else out there, something that didn't fit the narrative. She stepped outside again, frost burning against her cheeks. The wind cut through her coat. Still, she kept moving, tacking one flyer after another along the main trailhead signs, brushing snow off the wooden boards. The forest beyond stood silent, watchful, like it knew the answer she couldn't reach. She didn't cry, not anymore. Winona hadn't cried since the night she first heard her voicemail, when she saw Ethan's name blinking 3 times on her phone. The last message he left had been short, clipped. The weather's changing. We're heading back early. Talk later. But he hadn't called later. Neither had Vanessa. By the time she called the Rangers, dusk had already swallowed the trails. She stood there now, remembering. The warmth of his voice. The girls asking to hear one of Grandma Winona's survival stories. How she'd promised them next time. How she had chosen a fundraiser for at-risk youth that weekend instead. She had told Ethan to take pictures. He had sent her one. All 4 of them smiling in front of the same rocky backdrop they visited every year. It was supposed to be another tradition. Now, it was the last photo ever taken of them together. Winona exhaled, her breath a cloud that faded fast. She moved to the final board and secured the last flyer. As she stepped back, she felt the weight of each one, as though every piece of paper was a tether, holding her family's memory to this mountain. A crunch behind her broke the silence. She turned to see a man approaching from the woods, tall, bearded, dressed in camo and an orange safety vest. His steps were brisk, his breath visible in the cold. "Excuse me," he called, voice low and rough. "You mind if I take one of those flyers?" Winona eyed him. He didn't look dangerous, just weathered. "Go ahead," she said, handing one over. He took it, studied the image for a long beat. "Ben Foster," he said, offering a gloved hand. "Been hunting these woods 30 years. She shook it. "Winona Clark." His eyes flashed with recognition. "You're Ethan's mother." She nodded. "I remember him. Used to run through the foothills behind you, asking questions about tracks and scat. Good kid. Smart." Winona swallowed. He was. Ben hesitated, then reached into his pack. "I've got some cameras out here. Motion sensor trail cams. Mostly to track deer, but..." He trailed off, pulling out a handheld viewer. "I caught something a couple days ago. Thought it might be nothing, but now I'm not so sure." Winona's pulse quickened. She watched him scroll through blurry images, night shots, shifting branches, the flick of a tail. Then, 3 figures. A woman with shoulder-length hair, 2 children behind her, clinging close. They moved cautiously across the misty underbrush. The colors were muted, but Winona's breath caught. Coral jacket, yellow, lavender. That's them," she whispered. Ben didn't speak. He zoomed in slowly. "Taken 3 days ago," he said. "Northeast trail, 8 miles from here. Off path. No maintained routes. Dangerous after the storm." Winona stared, her gloved hand covering her mouth. Her eyes blurred, not from cold. "They're alive." Ben nodded. But there was no 4th figure, no Ethan. Winona asked, voice tight, "Where's my son?" "Could have been behind them," Ben offered. "Out of frame. Could have taken another route. This was just one angle." She didn't respond. The camera image stared back, Vanessa's face half turned. The girls looking down, moving deliberately, not lost, just trying to stay invisible. Winona took the viewer and held it close, the snow hissing as it hit the plastic. There was so much to question, so much that didn't add up. But one thing was certain now: someone had survived, and someone was missing. And whatever had happened 3 weeks ago, it wasn't over. She turned toward the mountain again, its peak lost in fog. Somewhere beyond that tree line, in the blinding white, something waited. She just didn't know yet if it was hope or the beginning of something darker. The wind had picked up by the time Winona returned to the lodge, carrying the trail cam footage like it was a fragile ember of truth. The image burned in her mind. Vanessa, the twins, alive, moving, breathing, and Ethan, still a ghost. Inside, the warmth felt dishonest. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the sound of silverware clinking against ceramic plates filled the main dining hall. Laughter drifted from a group of skiers who hadn't heard, or had chosen to forget, what had happened 3 weeks ago. Winona moved through them like smoke. Half the people looked away when they recognized her. The other half offered small, tight smiles, gestures of sympathy as practiced as they were useless. She poured herself a cup of hot water and retreated to a table near the edge of the room. From her coat pocket, she pulled out a crushed cup of instant noodles. It wasn't hunger she felt. It was the need to do something, anything, to ground herself in the moment. Her fingers trembled as she peeled back the lid and poured the water in. At a nearby table, two men, middle-aged, in fleece jackets, with ski passes still dangling from their necks, were murmuring in that too loud way people do when they think no one's listening. "That's her, right? The ranger, the millionaire woman. Yeah, donated a fortune to the Wilderness Education Foundation last month. And now her kid's missing. Karma can be cruel." Winona's jaw tightened. She stared into the steam rising from her cup. "If it were my family," one of the men continued, "I'd be out there right now. Storm be damned. Come on, she's almost 70. She's doing this alone," the other replied, not unkindly. "Can't be easy at her age." Winona didn't flinch, but the words, as careless as falling snow, settled into her bones. She thought of Ethan's voicemail again. How quickly the weather turned that day. How fast things had unraveled. Would Ethan wait until morning if it were her out there? No, not for a second. She left half the noodles untouched and slipped out of the hall without a word. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and just chose to let her go. Back in her room, she moved with a quiet purpose, the way someone might pack for a war they hadn't admitted they were already in. She reached under the bed and pulled out her old rescue bag, still packed, still organized like muscle memory. Thermal base layers, waterproof shell, reinforced boots, a sleeping bag designed for sub-zero survival, headlamp, batteries, protein bars, knife, whistle, first aid kit, fire starter, GPS. She paused only once, fingers hovering over the zipper, her eyes stinging. Then she stood, shoulders squared, and strapped on the pack. It fit like it always had, like it belonged there. Outside, the snowfall had thickened. Lamps along the walkways glowed in halos of white, and the sound of the wind had become a low, constant moan. Most hikers had already returned. The lodge felt like a last outpost before the world dissolved into wilderness. Winona kept to the shadows, her steps silent on the snow-packed trail. She didn't want questions, didn't want someone to try and stop her. She knew the weather was worsening. She knew it was a risk. But if there was a chance her granddaughters were still out there, if there was even a sliver of daylight left between them and whatever Vanessa was running from, then waiting wasn't an option. At the edge of the property, she paused to check her GPS. Ben's coordinates blinked back at her from the small screen. 8 miles, rough terrain, no trail. She adjusted the straps of her pack, pulled her hood tight, and stepped into the forest. The world changed the moment the lights of the lodge disappeared behind her. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick, pressing in from all sides. Trees loomed like sentinels, branches heavy with snow. Her boots sank deeper with each step. The cold gnawed at her cheeks and crept into the edges of her gloves. Still, she moved. She moved because her son might be dead. She moved because someone had lied about how. She moved because Hazel and Luna had trusted the one person who might have betrayed them. She moved because no one else would. Hours passed in a blur of white and breath. She navigated by instinct, by memory, by a kind of sixth sense honed from years spent pulling people out of places they weren't supposed to survive. Each time her muscles screamed, she pressed harder. Each time her vision blurred, she blinked away the tears. By the time the terrain began to slope steeply upward, the snow was falling in thick curtains, reducing visibility to a few feet. The trees thinned, giving way to exposed rock and slick patches of ice. She checked her GPS again. She was close. Less than a mile. And then, just beyond a grove of pines, light, faint, yellow, flickering through the storm. Her breath caught. A cabin. She hadn't known what to expect. A burned-out shelter? An abandoned lean-to? But this, it was solid, well-built, protected by a ring of trees, smoke curling from the chimney. Firelight glowed through the small window. She approached carefully, each step deliberate. The snow whispered beneath her boots. Her gloved hand reached out, then rapped gently on the door. Nothing. She knocked again, louder. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Still no response. She hesitated, then tried the handle. Locked. Just as she raised her hand to knock a third time, the door creaked open. And there, framed by the firelight, stood Vanessa. She looked older, thinner, her hair limp, her eyes wide and stunned. "Winona," she breathed. What are you doing here?" Before Winona could answer, two small faces peeked out from behind a wooden chair. Hazel and Luna. Their eyes widened, then filled with tears. "Grandma!" They cried in unison, rushing toward her, but stopping short, unsure, shy, like children, waking from a long nightmare. Winona dropped to her knees. It's okay," she said, her voice cracking. "I am here now." Vanessa moved quickly, ushering her inside, stripping off her snow-covered coat, guiding her toward the fire. "You're freezing," she said, voice shaking. "Let me get you something hot." Winona barely heard her. She was watching Hazel and Luna huddled together beneath a thick blanket in the corner. The girls looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, but alive. That alone should have brought relief. But it didn't, because Ethan wasn't there. And something in Vanessa's eyes, something tight, rehearsed, too calm, set Winona's nerves on edge. She sipped from a steaming mug of powdered milk and tried to slow her racing thoughts. But the questions came anyway. Where had they been for 3 weeks? Why hadn't they returned? Why this cabin, this particular place, deep in unsearched territory? And where was Ethan? She looked around. The cabin was small, but not primitive. Well stocked, wood neatly stacked, canned food, water, the kind of supplies someone had planned for. Something flickered in her mind. Too much wood, too clean. She stood slowly and wandered toward the kitchen area. Her eyes scanned the shelves. Then her gaze dropped to the floor. A board was slightly ajar. She crouched. Her fingers found the edge, pried it up. And there, in the dust, sat a ring. Not just any ring. Ethan's wedding band. Winona picked it up slowly, her breath caught between questions she was too afraid to ask. Vanessa had returned with the girls, but Winona had just found Ethan's ring, buried under the floorboards. Winona stared at the ring in her palm. The familiar diamond inlay shimmered faintly in the firelight, too clean, too intact for something supposedly lost in the chaos of a storm 3 weeks ago. She turned it over with her thumb, feeling its weight. Solid, real, out of place. A chill ran up her spine, not from the cold, but from the sudden shift in gravity around her. Ethan never took his ring off, not even during rescues, not even in the harshest weather. He used to joke that it grounded him, reminded him where he belonged. Vanessa's voice broke the silence behind her. It must have slipped off that first night. We were all freezing. I don't even remember. Winona looked over her shoulder. Vanessa stood just a few feet away, her hands twisting in front of her like she was trying to wring water from a dry cloth. Her expression was open, but wrong. Not grief, not shock. Something closer to calculation. I just found it under the floorboard, Winona said quietly, rising to her feet. It didn't look like it had been there long. Vanessa shrugged, too fast. I guess it got pushed down when we were all scrambling. That first night, it was chaos. The girls were crying. Ethan was trying to... She stopped, catching herself. Trying to what? Winona asked. But Vanessa turned away. I should check on the girls. She crossed the room quickly, crouching beside the makeshift bed where Hazel and Luna lay bundled under a thick blanket. She whispered to them, softly, stroked their hair, offered them a cup of warm milk. Winona watched her closely. Everything looked right. Everything sounded right. But nothing felt right. The girls were too quiet. Their eyes tracked their mother with a wary kind of obedience, not comfort. When Vanessa said it was time for bed, they obeyed without protest. When she tucked them in, they lay still, clutching each other, whispering nothing. And when they said, "Good night, Grandma," their voices trembled. Winona sat beside the fire, mug forgotten, as the cabin settled into silence. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the shadows danced. It wasn't grief that filled the room. It was something colder, a stillness that didn't belong. When the girls had drifted to sleep, their breathing slow and shallow, Vanessa returned to the center of the room. She sat opposite Winona at the small wooden table, cradling a mug of her own. Her hands no longer shook. Her eyes, finally steady, held Winona's like twin blades. "Ask me," she said. Winona didn't blink. "Where's my son?" Vanessa didn't answer right away. She stared into her drink. then looked past it, into the fire. "We had an accident," she said finally, her voice flat. "The day we left for the hike, we didn't check the weather properly. Stupid, I know. It hit faster than expected." She swallowed hard. "Ethan thought we could make it to the ridge and turn back before the worst of it. But we got pinned between two fronts. No reception. No way back. We panicked." Winona waited. "We found this cabin. Total luck. We sheltered here. The next morning, Ethan said he'd go for help. We argued. I told him not to leave, but he said we couldn't sit here forever, that the girls needed food, medical attention. He promised to be back before nightfall." Her voice cracked, but it sounded rehearsed, like lines from a play she'd been repeating to herself for weeks. "He never came back. Another storm hit that night, worse than the first. I wanted to look for him, but I couldn't leave the girls. I waited. Every day I waited." Winona's hands curled around the mug, blood pounding in her ears. "And you didn't try to make it back down the mountain once the storm passed?" "There was never a good window," Vanessa replied quickly, "and Hazel twisted her ankle the second week. I couldn't carry both. I thought maybe help would come to us. I didn't know if anyone was even looking anymore." Her voice softened. "I thought we were forgotten." Winona exhaled slowly. Every word out of Vanessa's mouth fit together too neatly, like puzzle pieces cut to deceive. The facts didn't add up. The supplies were too fresh, the woodpile too large, the girls too quiet. And now, Ethan's ring, buried, gleaming like a secret begging to be found. Winona rose. She moved to the shelves again, this time slower, more deliberate. She examined the boxes of food, the labels, the dates. She turned over a milk carton. "Vanessa," she said, not looking back, "this milk isn't expired. It would have gone bad a week ago in a cabin without refrigeration." "It must have been left here recently," Vanessa replied too quickly. "Maybe someone else uses the cabin. Maybe they restocked while we were out gathering firewood." Winona turned. "Didn't you say you were too afraid to leave the cabin? That you stayed in hiding the whole time?" Vanessa blinked. Her mouth opened, closed. "I meant just near the cabin. We didn't go far." Winona stepped forward. "You're lying." Vanessa's face stiffened. "You're tired. You should rest. I'm not the one who needs to explain why there are fresh supplies in an abandoned shelter, or why your husband's wedding ring was under the floor, or why Hazel flinched when you raised your voice." Vanessa stood now. "Stop. What did you do to him?" Winona's voice was low, sharp. "I said stop!" But it was too late. Everything cracked in that moment. The story, the silence, the performance. Winona moved toward the back of the cabin, toward the trash bin near the door, looking for further proof. Something discarded, something hidden. But she didn't make it. A hard blow struck the back of her head, blunt, fast, final. The mug flew from her hand. The floor tilted. Darkness swept in like a curtain pulled tight. When she opened her eyes, her vision was smeared in pain and light. Her mouth tasted like copper. The room spun in slow, tilting loops. The fire had burned down to low embers. The girls were gone. The cabin was empty. And Winona was tied to a chair. Her arms were pulled tight behind her, ropes digging into her wrists. Her ankles were lashed to the chair legs. Her breathing came in short, shallow bursts. Her head throbbed with each beat of her heart. Then she smelled it. Gasoline. The sharp, unmistakable bite of fuel laced the air, soaked into the wooden floorboards. Winona's eyes widened. The fire. It wasn't an accident. She twisted her body, testing the knots. Pain lanced through her shoulder, but the chair groaned. She rocked harder. The old wood creaked, shifted, cracked. Somewhere behind her, a flame popped. The fuel had reached the embers. Heat surged up her spine. Winona gritted her teeth and threw her weight to the side. The chair tipped. Wood splintered. Her shoulders slammed into the floor. The ropes held. But something in the chair gave way. She reached, straining her fingers toward her pocket. It was still there. Her folding knife. Tiny. Old. But still sharp. The smell of gas grew stronger. She could hear the fire crawling now, hungry, fast. Her fingers closed around the handle. She flipped the blade open, sawing furiously at the rope. The heat pressed closer. Sweat poured down her face despite the cold. One rope snapped, then another. She kicked her legs free, scrambled to her feet, stumbled to the door. Locked. Of course. She turned, heart pounding, and grabbed a log from the woodpile, slammed it into the window. Once. Twice. The glass, spider-webbed, cracked, then shattered. The flames roared behind her as she climbed through the jagged frame, glass slicing into her hands and thighs. She tumbled into the snow outside. The cold hit her like a wave, but she was alive. She turned, breath catching as the cabin lit up from within. Fire curling along the walls, licking at the roof. The whole structure groaned as smoke billowed into the sky, and then it exploded. The blast knocked her backward, heat searing her face, snow melting instantly beneath her. She lay there, stunned, staring at the orange glow pulsing against the night. The cabin, gone. Her gear, gone. Vanessa, gone. And somewhere out there, Hazel and Luna, or at least one of them. Then, through the trees, came the sound that stopped her breath cold. A child's voice, crying, calling. Grandma? The voice came again, thinner this time, wrapped in wind and fear. Grandma, it hurts. Winona scrambled upright, pain flaring in her ribs and thigh, where glass had torn through skin. Snow clung to her palms, bloody and stinging. The air was freezing, yet every breath burned her lungs. The fire behind her still raged, lighting up the trees like a false sunrise. But she had no time to look back. She turned toward the sound, sharp, desperate, and pushed into the woods. Branches slapped against her face. The ground dipped and twisted beneath the snow. Her boots sank into drifts past her shins. But none of it mattered. Hazel, she called, voice cracking. Is that you? No, came the reply, a small cry. Luna? A faint sob. Yes. Then a shape, curled beneath a boulder, jacket purple, legs bent awkwardly, snow halfway up her side. Winona's heart seized. She dropped to her knees beside the girl. Luna's face was wet with tears, her cheeks red with windburn. One leg stretched stiffly across the snow, her ankle twisted at a sickening angle. She was shivering violently, teeth chattering too hard for words. Winona yanked off her gloves and pressed her hands to the child's cheeks. I've got you. I'm here now. It hurts, Luna whimpered. I know, baby, I know. Winona tore off her scarf and began fashioning a splint with branches, gently lifting the broken limb. The girl bit her lip, tears flowing freely. Where's your sister? Winona asked softly, eyes darting across the shadows. Where's Hazel? Luna hesitated. Mom said she needed to go farther. Said it was a sacrifice. Winona's blood went cold. She left you here? Luna nodded. She said someone had to slow things down. That you might follow. The words were barely whispers, but they cut through Winona like ice. Vanessa had left her own daughter behind, in sub-zero temperatures, injured, alone, as a delay tactic, a pawn, and she'd taken Hazel. Winona gathered Luna into her arms. The child's weight felt like everything she'd been carrying in her chest these past 3 weeks. A reason to keep moving. A reason to not collapse. We're getting out of here, she said. But where's Hazel? Luna asked again, her voice small, scared. Winona pressed her lips to the girl's forehead. We'll find her. First, we need to get you somewhere warm, somewhere safe. She rose slowly, cradling Luna to her chest, every movement sparking agony in her thigh and back. But she kept walking. She walked because Vanessa had crossed a line that no mother ever should. She walked because Hazel might still be out there. She walked because some promises weren't made with words. They were made in blood and memory. Each step was a war. Her boots slid over ice, stumbled over roots, waded through drifts, waist deep in places. The cold crept higher, numbing her toes, her fingers, her jaw. She knew she had maybe 2 hours before her body would begin to shut down from exposure. But she also knew the mountain. She recognized the jagged rock formations ahead, the frozen creek that curled east. These were markers. These were hers by the time she reached the edge of a groomed trail. The first blush of dawn had begun to stain the sky. Pale pink, pale hope. Winona staggered into view just as the first hikers of the morning rounded a bend, their footsteps halting in shock. A young woman dropped her ski poles. Oh my God, help! Somebody help! People ran. Voices shouted. A ranger sprinted toward her, walkie crackling. Winona didn't hear the words, just the hands reaching for her, the arms lifting Luna from her grasp, the heat of the lodge foyer pressing around her like a distant wave. She collapsed to her knees in the snow, breath heaving. We need medics now. She's got hypothermia. Call search and rescue. Get her on fluids. And then, it's Winona Clark and one of the missing girls. Inside the lodge, everything moved in a blur. Luna was carried to the fireplace, blankets piled around her, staff pressing warm drinks into her hands, medics stabilizing her ankle. Someone offered Winona a dry coat, but she refused. She stood beside her granddaughter, blood drying on her hands, soot still smeared across her face, refusing to leave. The lodge manager appeared, wide-eyed, stunned. Ms. Clark, a woman and a child were spotted on the gondola early this morning. We think it might have been Vanessa and Hazel. They didn't stop, just went straight down the mountain. Winona swayed slightly. They're gone? We don't know where yet. We're checking cameras. We've notified state police. A sound outside, a wail of sirens cutting through the quiet. 2 paramedics rushed through the front doors, then froze when they saw the child. She needs immediate transport, one said. Winona grabbed his arm. I'm going with her. Of course. He nodded. Your family. They loaded Luna carefully onto a stretcher. As they moved toward the ambulance, a uniformed officer stepped in front of Winona. Ms. Clark, we need a statement, urgently. There's been a complication. Winona narrowed her eyes. What kind of complication? The officer cleared his throat. Vanessa Whitaker arrived at the hospital an hour ago with a child. She claims she was fleeing from you. Winona blinked. She told staff you found them, went mad, tried to hurt her, that Ethan died in an accident, but you refused to believe it. Winona almost laughed. She left her daughter to die in the snow. She claims you abducted Luna. I saved her. I believe you, the officer said carefully. But it's your word against hers right now, and she's already contacted a lawyer. Winona gritted her teeth. Then let's go to the hospital. I'll tell them what really happened. We'll escort you, the officer said. She climbed into the ambulance beside Luna, never letting go of her hand. The girl had begun to doze off, exhaustion finally overtaking pain. Winona brushed hair from her forehead. Grandma, Luna murmured, half asleep. Is Hazel okay? Winona didn't lie. I don't know yet, she said, but I'll find her. The sirens rose. The road twisted down the mountain. Through the window, the trees passed by in a blur. Silent, ancient witnesses to everything that had unfolded. At the hospital, nurses met them at the bay doors, wheeling Luna inside. Winona was pulled aside for triage, hands shaking as a nurse cleaned the cuts on her fingers. Another checked her pulse. A third touched the bandage on her thigh. You're lucky, someone muttered. Could have been worse. But Winona didn't feel lucky. She felt like she was standing at the edge of another storm. She was led down a hallway to a waiting room where a police officer sat at a small round table with a clipboard. He gestured for her to sit. Before we proceed, I need you to know, Vanessa has made serious allegations. She's claiming attempted assault, abduction. She tried to kill me, Winona said calmly. We'll need to investigate everything. Get statements. Secure physical evidence. She left Luna to die. She set the cabin on fire. She hit me from behind with a weapon. The only reason I'm here is because I broke a window and ran through a fire. The officer made notes, glancing up occasionally. A knock at the door. A doctor leaned in. The child's stable, he said. Clean break to the tibia. We'll prep her for surgery this afternoon. Winona stood immediately. Can I see her? Of course. He guided her down the hall. As they walked, another officer fell into step beside them. There's one more thing, he said softly. A man came in voluntarily this morning. Ben Foster. Said he had something to confess. Winona stopped. He said he witnessed what really happened on the mountain, that Vanessa didn't just lie, that she pushed Ethan. The hallway swayed slightly beneath her feet. I want to hear it, she said, and you will. But first, go see your granddaughter. He held the door open. Inside, Luna lay in a hospital bed, her leg propped up in a soft cast, IV in her arm. She looked impossibly small in that bed, her cheeks still pink with cold, her eyes fluttering open. Grandma, she whispered. Winona sat beside her, took her hand, and leaned close. I'm here, sweetheart, she said softly, and I'm not going anywhere. But in her chest, a storm was already beginning to rise again. Because if Ben was telling the truth, then Ethan hadn't died by chance. He'd been murdered, and Vanessa wasn't running from grief. She was running from justice. Winona stood in the hallway outside the radiology wing, her hands still flecked with dried blood, her coat folded neatly over one arm. The nurse had wanted to throw it out. It reeked of smoke and was torn in two places. But she refused. That coat had walked her out of a burning cabin. It had carried her through snowdrifts with her granddaughter cradled in her arms. Some things weren't meant to be discarded. Luna was in surgery now, a clean tibial break. The doctors had said she was lucky. Winona didn't believe in luck anymore. She watched the elevator doors open across the hall. A man stepped out, tall, bearded, shoulders hunched like a man already walking into his own judgment. Ben Foster. He removed his cap as he approached, holding it tight in his hands like it might shield him from what he was about to say. The police officer standing beside Winona stepped forward. "Mr. Foster, this is your opportunity to give a full statement. Are you still willing to cooperate?" Ben looked at Winona. She looked back at him, hard and unflinching. Her silence was permission, but not forgiveness. "I am," he said. They moved into a small consultation room. Winona took a seat across from Ben. Two officers flanked them, one activating a recorder. Ben cleared his throat, then began. "It was 3 weeks ago. I was tracking elk near the North Ridge. Storm had rolled in faster than expected, so I turned back toward my cabin. One I built myself, off-grid. Not many folks know about it." Winona said nothing, just listened. "I found them already there. Ethan, Vanessa, the 2 girls. They were in bad shape. Wet, cold, scared. Ethan explained they got lost trying to take a shortcut back to the trailhead before the storm hit. I offered them shelter." Ben's hands tightened around his cap. Ethan was tense, kept stepping outside to check the sky. Said he wanted to hike out alone at first light, get help. Vanessa didn't want him to. They argued. Ben's voice slowed. Each word was a weight. "That morning, I left early. Told them I needed to check trail cams. I was maybe 30 yards out when I heard yelling, then screaming." He looked up, his eyes red. "I turned back, took the long side around the ridge, and that's when I saw it." The room was dead silent. Vanessa was standing at the cliff's edge. Ethan was down below. He wasn't moving. Winona's heart stopped. She didn't see me. The girls were behind some trees. I don't think they saw the fall, but they heard it. I did too. The officer asked, "And you didn't intervene?" Ben looked ashamed. "I panicked. I wasn't armed. And she was already calling the girls back inside. She saw me later that day, when I came back to bring them more firewood. Said if I helped her, if I kept quiet, she'd make it worth my while. That she had access to Ethan's life insurance. $2 million. Winona's stomach twisted. She said she'd share it. All she needed was time to wait out the search efforts. I brought them food, water. I kept the cabin warm. I told myself it was temporary." He exhaled. But then she changed. She started saying strange things. That she needed one of the girls to stay behind in case someone came looking. That she might fake an accident. Then you showed up. Ben looked at Winona again. "When you asked about my camera footage, I knew she'd never let you leave once she realized you were close. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, it would blow over. But when I saw her come down the gondola with only one child, I knew something had happened. That's when I called the police." The room stayed still until Winona finally stood. She looked down at him, her voice low and even. "You helped her cover up the murder of my son. You watched her lie to her children. You gave her shelter. And when she left, one of them, in the snow, to die, you still hesitated." Ben swallowed. "I know." The officer moved to cuff him. Ben didn't resist. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said as he was led out of the room. "But I hope you find Hazel. And I hope they both get a better life than the one she gave them." Winona watched him go, jaw set tight. Her hands were trembling, but not from cold. An officer turned to her. With his statement and the evidence we've collected, we're preparing to charge Vanessa with first-degree murder, attempted murder, child endangerment, and obstruction of justice. She's still here? Winona asked. Room 214. We've kept her separate from Hazel. Hazel, the other half of the twins. The girl Vanessa had taken when she fled. Winona's heart surged again. I want to be there when you arrest her, she said. The detective nodded. We'll be executing the arrest warrant now. You can observe. Just don't speak until we've finished reading the charges. Winona followed them through the hospital wing. Every footstep echoed. The building's white lights hummed overhead. When they reached room 214, two uniformed officers waited outside the door. One of them knocked. Inside, Vanessa's voice called, calm and controlled. Come in. The door opened. Vanessa sat upright in bed, dressed in hospital linens, her hair neatly combed. Monitors beeped softly beside her. Her eyes met Winona's instantly. They didn't waver. Vanessa Whitaker, the detective began, voice level. You are under arrest for the murder of Ethan Whitaker, attempted murder of Winona Clark and Luna Whitaker, and multiple counts of child endangerment. Vanessa's face stayed unreadable. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say. He was cheating on me, Vanessa said suddenly. Her voice wasn't loud, just flat, detached. Winona stiffened. He was planning to leave me, Vanessa continued. Had already spoken to a lawyer about revising our prenup, changing his life insurance beneficiaries. He was going to take the girls. That's not a justification, one officer said. Vanessa's eyes flicked to Winona. Don't act like you knew everything, she hissed. You always thought he was perfect. I knew he loved those girls, Winona replied, her voice trembling. And I know he would have never left them, unless someone made sure he couldn't come back. Vanessa's jaw clenched. You left Luna in the snow to die, Winona said. I had no choice, Vanessa spat. She twisted her ankle. We couldn't carry her. I needed to get Hazel out. You didn't get her out, Winona snapped. You used her. You ran. The detective motioned. The officer stepped in, cuffing Vanessa's hands to the bed rail. We'll be transferring you to county detention as soon as you're medically cleared, the detective said. You'll be held without bail pending indictment. Vanessa turned her face to the wall. Winona walked out without another word. Back in the pediatric ward, Hazel was awake. A social worker sat beside her, offering soft reassurance. The girl looked up when Winona entered. She looked so much like her sister, it made Winona ache. Grandma? She asked. I'm here, Winona said, crouching beside her. Hazel's lips quivered. Where's Luna? She's okay, in another room. She'll be out of surgery soon. Hazel began to cry. Winona wrapped her arms around her and held her close. She told me Daddy fell, Hazel whispered. She said he slipped. I know, sweetheart. But I don't think it was true. Winona's throat tightened. You don't have to figure that out today, she said softly. You just have to know this. We're going home. All of us. Hazel nodded against her chest, and for the first time in weeks, Winona allowed herself to believe it. The snow had finally stopped falling. In the small town of Estes Park, winter sunlight filtered through frost-laced pine branches, soft and gold like a whispered promise. It was the first clear morning since the storm, since everything that had been hidden was finally brought to light. Winona stood by the window of the small rental cabin on the edge of the forest. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was shelter. And for now, that was enough. Luna lay curled on the couch beside the fireplace. her cast propped on a pillow, a blanket tucked beneath her chin. Hazel sat cross-legged on the floor beside her, holding a deck of cards neither girl had the energy to play. Winona watched them for a long time, two small figures against the silence, daughters of a shattered world, and yet still full of something unbroken, something waiting to bloom. A knock at the door pulled her gently from thought. She opened it to find Detective Harris standing in the snow, a file tucked beneath his arm, and a weariness that clung to his posture like fog. "I figured you'd want the full report," he said, handing her the file. "Ben Foster's testimony checks out. The insurance money, the cabin, even the emails Ethan had drafted but never sent. We've got enough for a clean conviction." Winona took the file, but didn't open it. "Any word from Vanessa's legal team?" she asked quietly. "They've requested a psychiatric evaluation. Her attorney's going for diminished capacity." Harris exhaled. "But with Hazel's testimony and the physical evidence, it won't change much. She'll be facing 25 to life." Winona nodded, her lips pressed in a thin, unreadable line. "I also wanted to say," Harris added, shifting his weight, "you saved those girls. You chased a truth no one else would have believed in. That counts for something." "I didn't save them," Winona said. "I just didn't stop looking." The detective gave a quiet nod, then turned and walked back toward his car. As his taillights disappeared down the icy road, Winona slowly closed the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing in, breathing out. She placed the file on the table without opening it. She no longer needed proof. She had the girls. Later that night, after she helped Luna brush her teeth and read a chapter from an old paperback she'd found in the hospital donation bin, she stepped into the room where Hazel had curled up beneath the thickest quilt in the house. The girl blinked up at her in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. "Are we going to live here now?" Hazel asked. Winona hesitated. "No," she said gently. "Not here. But we'll find somewhere." "Where's home?" the girl asked. Winona sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a stray lock of hair from Hazel's forehead. "Home," she said, "is anywhere we're together. That's where we'll start." Hazel smiled sleepily, then whispered, "I had a dream last night. Daddy was at a lake. He had a red canoe. He said he was okay." Tears welled up in Winona's eyes, but she nodded, steady. "I believe that. I miss him." "I do too." Hazel's breath slowed. She was already drifting. Winona stayed beside her until she was sure both girls were asleep. Then she stepped outside. The cold was gentler now. The wind no longer cut like a blade. She walked toward this edge of the trees where a clearing opened into the first glimpse of spring's slow approach. Patches of earth peeking through melted snow, the promise of thaw. She let her eyes rise to the stars above, thousands of them flung like shattered glass across the sky. "Ethan," she whispered. For months, she had carried anger like armor. The injustice, the lies, the helplessness of watching the world keep turning while a family was torn apart. But tonight, something inside her shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe release. A small voice broke the silence. "Grandma?" She turned. Luna stood at the doorway in her cast and socks, wrapped in a blanket. "You should be sleeping," Winona said softly. "I couldn't," the girl replied. "I had a question." Winona walked back toward her. "What is it?" Luna hesitated. "Are we safe now?" Winona crouched down, holding her granddaughter's gaze. "We are," she said. "We are now." Luna nodded and hugged her tightly. They stood like that, surrounded by silence and snow, and the first breath of a future that, while uncertain, was finally theirs to shape. The next morning, they left the cabin behind, packed what little they had into a borrowed SUV, turned the ignition, and drove toward the valley. No fanfare, no headlines, just a grandmother, two girls, and a road that stretched wide and open beneath a warming sun. In the back seat, Hazel hummed softly to herself. Luna stared out the window, watching the trees blur past. Winona kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly over her heart. Somewhere in that silence, there was still grief, still unanswered questions, but there was also breath and laughter and the sound of two children beginning again. And sometimes that's all the healing we're allowed in this world. Not perfection, not justice wrapped in ribbons, but survival, together. And that, at last, was enough.